Hi, in this video I want to talk about another loop pattern, one that involves searching for an item in a collection of values. Uh, so basically a searching loop reports that something can be found, and there's two main forms we're going to look at here. One is it can return true or false depending on whether the item exists in the collection or not, and the other form is returning the location of where it is can be found. For example, an index of a character in a string. And I want you to be comfortable with both of those and see examples of both of those. So over here I have an example of a method that searches for a character, and we'll call it the character we're looking for, we're going to call key, in a single string that I'm calling sentence. And I'm going to loop over all the characters in the sentence. In order to use a for each loop, I have to convert the string into a character array. And so the for each can loop over each character in that array. I'm going to check to see if the thing we're looking for, the key, is equal to the letter that we were now looking at in the sentence. And if we find it, we can immediately return true, right? If I'm looking at a sentence, David, and I'm looking for V in David, and it finds the V, we don't have to look anymore. We can immediately exit out of the method with a true value. If I've gone over all the, my indenting's a little off here. If I've gone over all the values, so I finished the loop, and I have not yet returned true, that means we were not able to find the key in the sentence, and I'm going to return false at this point. So if I run this, here I'm going to do an example of searching for the character D in David, and of course that's lowercase there, and it says that it's true. I should test the opposite case. So I'm going to search for something that's not in there. Well, anything really. E. Search for E in David. And then the first one returns true, and the second one returns false. All right, so this kind of method is often used, for example, maybe in an if statement. So you want to check if something is true and then do some action based on that. And so by returning a Boolean here, it can be used as the condition in the if statement. Now, a very common thing is when you hear this kind of problem, you might say, return true if you find the letter, otherwise return false. And people turn that into something that looks like this. That kind of sounds the same, right? Return true if you find the letter, otherwise return false. Let's see what this does when I run it. It doesn't know that it's going to be in here. I have to just return. I'm going to stick a value in there. Okay. It returns false in both cases here. When it's looking for D, it enters the loop. The first letter it looks at is capital D. Is lowercase D equal to capital D? No. So it returns false right away. It doesn't loop anymore. It just checks that first letter and goes on. So again, this sort of sounds right, and it's a very common mistake, but you need to finish your loop, check every letter before you're definitively able to say the key is not in the sentence. All right, so don't skip out too early. So when you're looking at searching loops in general, they all have a similar structure in some ways. There is, again, a search item, the thing you're looking for, and we sometimes call that the key or the target. There is a collection of things we're looking in. In this case, it was a string. We're looking at characters. It could be an array of some kind. We need some way of comparing the current item with the target. So here we're comparing the letter, the current item, with the target key, and then some way of making progress. And so the loop makes progress for us here. And then finally, we need some way of showing the key was found or not found. And we do that by here returning true when we find it, and returning false when we have looked at all the letters and we haven't found it. So let me just write another example here that is related. This time I'm just going to look at an array of stuff. So public static. Again, we're returning a Boolean in this case because we're returning a true or false. And I'm going to call this search for name. And I'm going to take in a string key. That's the thing I'm looking for. and then a string array of names in this case. So an array of strings, right? Since this is an array, I can loop over it directly for string name in names. In other words, pull out the names a name one at a time from the names array. I'm going to check if the key, now because we're comparing objects here, I have to use dot equals, key equals name. And if they are equal, we've found it, so I can return true. And again, I don't want to do the else right away. I need to finish the loop, and then if I've looked at all the elements in names, none are equal to the key, then I can return false as the final answer here. So again, same kind of structure, what we're looking for, what we're looking in, some sort of loop to make progression through all the different elements, some way of comparing them, and then a way to indicate that we found it or did not find it. So same structure, slightly different context here, right? An array and a string here. But if you kind of keep those different things in mind, then no matter what I ask you to search in, you can kind of build up the correct solution on this based on this pattern, right? This is the pattern, a template for you to follow. So again, we have the key, the things that we're looking for, a way of checking that they're the same or not, and a way of showing that it's found or not found. Now, the other variation I want to talk about is when we want to not just say whether we find it or not, but we want to say where we found it. And you can imagine this might have some use if we are, for example, wanting to take that location and do something with it. Maybe it's an array and we want to replace the value of the thing that we found. Maybe we want to take the one the element that's right before the one that we found, and so we need to know the location so we can go back one or something like that. So in that case, we need a slightly different structure for our method. Public static. So I'm going to return an int because I'm going to return an index. I'm going to say where we found this thing. And right now I'm looking for a, I have that name a little bit off. I'm going to call this find char. I modified this at the last minute, char index. So I'm looking for a character. And so I have a character key and a string sentence that I'm going to be looking for these things in. Okay, so now I can't use a for each loop because the for each loop pulls values out of the collection but doesn't tell you where that thing is, and I need to know the location. So I'm going to actually make a full for loop that ranges over the index values that are allowable for that sentence string. So I'm going to start at 0. I'm going to go while index is less than sentence dot length. Notice arrays, if you're doing arrays, it's just dot length, and with sentence, with a string, it's a method call that returns the length. And add one to index. And again, I like to use index in this context because up here we're having values, so they're like name or num or something like that. And here this thing really is an index, and so let's call it an index. I'm going to see if the key is equal to the sentence, and I'm going to pull out the character at index, and if those are the same, in other words, if the letter I'm looking at right now is equal to the key character, then I'm going to return index. Now if I go through it all and have not found that character, I need to return something here. I cannot return false here because the return type of the method is int, right? So I have to return some kind of number. And the question is, what should I do? We had perfectly reasonable choices above where it's either true or false that we found it. Here I'm returning a number that's going to be like 0 up to the length, and not including the length of the string. So I need to find some special value that means I didn't find it. And a reasonable thing to do, at least in the case of an index, is to return -1 here, because there is no valid index. It's -1. And if you get that value back when you're calling it, you know that you didn't actually find it. All right, so we can use, again, a disallowed value, one that is not able to show up in this case, in the true case, as the false case. And this happens in other kinds of searches too, where you need some sort of special thing to show you didn't find it. I will point out that if, so the main thing to keep in mind here is that if you're trying to get the location of where the thing was found, as opposed to the thing itself, we already know what it is. We're looking for this particular thing. We need to have an index available to ourselves, and so we choose to use a for loop of index values, and that's again in contrast up here, where we just wanted the value itself, and we used a for each loop to loop over the values in that collection. Let's just test this thing out real quick. So I'm going to steal that there and find chart index, and I'm looking for E in, no, better not look for E, look for A in David, and if I run this, it says index 1, and again that's because index 0 is the capital D and index 1 has the lowercase a, so it found that. And again, just to see if the alternate case works, I'm going to search for E here, and we get a -1 out. And again, once I have that location, I can do other things based on that information. All right, I can decide to split the word at that location or something like that. Do a substring, for example. All right, so those are the two main forms. One is just something that says whether or not you find it, true, false, and I want you to be cautious about making these correctly, right? Don't put the false too fast. Here we're looping over a string, here we're looping over an array, and here we are looping over the valid index values of the string or an array if it was an array, and returning where we found the search for item. All right, thanks.